Rachel Brown is a British flutist and author, known especially for her work with Baroque and historical flutes. She's currently professor of Baroque flute at the Royal College of Music in London, in addition to traveling around the world to give performances and master classes. She's performed as principal flute with the Kent Opera, the Academy of Ancient Music, the Hanover Band, the King's Consort, Collegium Musicum 90, Ex Cathedra, and the Brandenburg Consort. She's known for her extensive work and mastery of both historical and modern flutes.
Hello.
How are you doing?
Good to talk.
Good to talk to you. You mentioned the other day that the Hanover Band was celebrating Beethoven's 250th birthday. So
Yes.
I watched the performance of Beethoven 9. It was beautiful.
Well, the whole project has been incredible, actually, and for that orchestra to achieve it at this time has been incredible because the woman who founded it, Caroline Brown, no relation, but she and her husband ran it. She was the sort of the inspiration behind everything. It's extraordinary. I mean, back in the summer, the end of August and beginning of September, we filmed the first 8 symphonies, one after another. We didn't do them in order, but I must admit, I mean, obviously played them all before, and sometimes played several of them, but to immerse yourself for 2 weeks only playing Beethoven, it takes you to some other place, you know.
What's it like to sit in such a wonderful orchestra and hear probably the way the audience has heard it when it was performed for the first time?
I mean, I can't imagine what the first players felt. They are really, really challenging, and I've looked and looked and looked for other music that players might have been playing at that time, which could have prepared them for this kind of thing. You know, any practice material, any studies. There's nothing quite like it at all, and you know, it goes higher and higher and higher, and you can find the odd study that's got top A's, but it's not things that are consistently that high all the time. You know, I mean, I decided for the project back in the summer to, because it was like running a marathon every day for 2 weeks, I thought I have to train for this in a different way. So I thought, rather than spend a lot of time playing through the pieces, and I mean, I was very conscious I had to build up the stamina, but I thought, no, I need to really sort of zone in on certain things. So I spent a long time screenshotting all the bits of the parts that needed particular practice, and so I had a sort of section on the low register, you know, and then things in the middle, and then things for tonguing, and things for real legato and trills, and you know, and then each of the high notes, sort of really working on those, and taking all the things from the first 8 symphonies together. When I came to do the 9th, you know, I couldn't really approach it in the same way, because I was thinking, okay, so what can I practice from this part that's in the low register? And there's virtually no notes down in, there's one bottom D, but almost nothing else that goes into the low register. I would love to know much more about who exactly was playing. I started looking at Raichu wind quintets, actually. I was talking to our horn player. He was telling me that Beethoven and Raichu knew each other sort of in earlier life quite well before he left Bonn, and stayed in touch, I think. So yeah, I started practicing some wind quintet parts, which I'd never done before. But even some of the parts for things like Bach cantatas and things. You know, the Bach cantatas, Bach was writing a different cantata every week for 2 years. And so it's possible that the players would have had the parts a long time in advance, but much more likely that the absolute earliest they would have got them would have been Monday night. I don't know if you know, do you know the cantata number 8? It's got an incredibly high flute part. I mean, the opening symphonia is very high, but then the flute part, if you look at the original manuscript, this flute part, which is full of top A's and G sharps, which are also difficult, the original part has got a big cross, the whole thing crossed out. And years later, he transposed the whole cantata down into G major instead of A. And it's still very high, and it still sounds very high, but it's perfectly playable, you know. Even 100 years later, in 1824 rather than 1724, A is still the top note, and it's being pushed and pushed and pushed. You know, Beethoven's asking for it all the time. My life changed the day I met Trevor. I had a place at the Royal College of Music on Saturdays. They have a kind of junior college, and I'd got a scholarship from my local education authority to have lessons there. I had a very good teacher there, but she was really a pianist actually, and she did play the flute, but flute was her second instrument, you know, and so she would accompany me in lots of lessons, which was amazing actually. She was obviously a very good pianist, and I remember the time I took the Prokofiev, I just arrived with it, and she sat down and played the piano part for me. You know, she was a very good musician, and I was well taught, but there were things I desperately needed help with. I was at school with somebody called Sarah Fenn. I don't know if you've come across her. She's now the orchestral manager of the English concert, actually. Well, she has been for years. But she was a couple of years above me at school. And there weren't many musicians in our school, so she and I played a lot together. We did a lot of duets and got on very well. And she had been going to Trevor's summer school since she was about 10, you see. So she kept going on and on and on about the Canterbury Summer School and Trevor why this and Trevor why that. And I was sort of thinking, oh, not Trevor why, you know, I'm sort of bored of hearing about Trevor why already, and I've never even met him. But then one year I was 15, and another friend of mine at junior college said, oh, I think I'm going to go on this summer school. So I started thinking about it, you know, and I took the leaflet about it home. Most people went for the first half or the second half, but my father looked at it and said, I think you better go for the whole 3 weeks. So I was sent off, and my parents didn't quite know what had happened when I came back, because I just went to my room and played the flute for hours and hours and hours, which I had never done before. But he's a very, very direct person. When you arrived at that summer school, everybody had to go and play to him, and he heard about 3 bars, and then he would say, fine, you'll be on Wibb's class. Or you'll be in Kate's class. class, or you'd be in somebody else's class, or so that for the mornings you were assigned to a certain group, and that was that. And for some reason he heard 2 lines of music, which everybody's saying 2 lines, and he took time after that to talk to me, and he said, okay, this, and this, all wrong. Trevor was the first person I had ever met who really could tell me, this is wrong, this is how you do it, get on with it. So the next morning I had to stand up and play in the masterclass, and I thought, well, it would be quite useful for me to play one of the pieces I might play for my grade 8 exam. So, being completely naive about this, I took the Mozart D major concerto first movement. Not realising that perhaps Mozart wasn't the best thing to start with, in at the deep end sort of thing. And in true Trevor fashion, he tore me to shreds. Everybody came up to me and said, oh, how could he say such things? You played beautifully, and, you're great, and all this. And I was just kind of in shock, because I thought, for the first time in my life, I now know what is wrong, and I now have some idea what to do about it. This was the best lesson of my life. First of all, to listen and to think, but, work out what are the problems, what do you want to hear in the music, and what's stopping you doing that naturally. From that moment onwards, I decided Trevor or nothing, basically. I mean, I wanted to study with him. I could see over the years that very direct, very almost blunt sometimes way of telling people, he would never be polite. He had all sorts of expressions for telling you it was rubbish. Some unrepeatable, and he was never satisfied unless it was really out of this world, and even in my very last lesson before my final diploma, I went with one of the university lecturers who had kindly accompanied me a lot that last year, and he sat in silence through the whole lesson and came out, and he was so angry afterwards. He said, how dare he treat you like that, And I said, but don't you think it's amazing that in the last lesson he's still demanding more? It'd be great if there was no more to demand, but if there's any doubt in his mind, he shouldn't just be polite, he shouldn't just be respectful, he should demand, to push me higher and higher. I suppose I thrived on that in a way, which not everybody did. It didn't suit everybody, but he had an incredibly high standard, and he would do anything to get you there. He was one of the most generous and supportive people, actually, although he was extremely tough at the same time. We've remained incredible friends.
What sorts of etudes did he use? Did he use his own, or were you using Noyes, or what?
Yeah, a lot of Noyes. Yes, we did certainly use all. I mean, his first 4 practice books came out they were published, I think, the week I started learning with him. I went for my first lesson, and amongst all the other things that he did in that first lesson, he said, have you bought my practice books? And I said, no. And he said, why not? And I said, well, I'm coming to study with you, so you and he said, you buy them by next week, and you've read them by next week, and you tell me what you think. And then the next week he said, what do you think? And I said, yeah, they're very good. I mentioned something about he said, there's a bit that's really just like Noyes de la sonorité, and he said, Noyes didn't invent the semitone. The thing with Trevor, he has a brilliant way of, in a chatty, sort of approachable way. You haven't got to read a lot of, long texts and scholarly things and all that. It's just, quite direct, and he'd do this, try it like that, and persevere with this, and you will get it. Although he was, a very, very demanding and very dogmatic teacher, he absolutely loved it when one of his students showed somehow something that they were passionate about or good at, that they could develop off in another direction from other people, So, like Ian McLaughlin was a couple of years above me, and he realised that Ian was brilliant with his hands, and Ian had a natural way of just doing something with an instrument. He went into instrument making, but he's become a fantastic head joint maker and a repairer and everything. But they made a harpsichord together in their free time with other people. If it was some other aspect of what if he could see, this is what's going to make this person employable in some way, or give them something they've got that other people haven't got. He absolutely loved it. So, almost every other teacher probably would have, certainly at that time, have seen it as diverting you from all the things you should be doing for him, that he was losing a good pupil, or... Trevor always talked about Noyes. Of course, we did use a lot of the Noyes studies, particularly the 24 little studies, which are quite puzzling to a lot of people because they are ostensibly so simple, but actually, sometimes the simplest things are the hardest things to play to perfection. And I know he went to study with Noyes every summer. He went on summer schools. He went over and over and over those books, those studies, until those fundamental musical points had been so thoroughly absorbed that you could apply them to much more complicated music, and it sort of sorted out everything for you. He did actually take me to meet Marcel Noyes. He would sort of make a kind of annual pilgrimage, and in fact Noyes, even when he was living in the States, I think he liked to go back to France every year, to the village where he was born. And at the end of my third year as a student with Trevor, he called me up and he said, "Brown, you need a holiday. Come with us." He said, "We're all going to see Marcel Noyes." And he said, "Edward Blakeman is coming. He's a flute player and scholar. He was writing a book on Paul Taffanel. And Noyes was 91, and he was the last living link. He was the last living person who had actually studied with Taffanel. So I went out to France and met them all there. On the night we arrived, he introduced me and Edward to, and he always called him Monsieur Noyes, and he said, "Monsieur Noyes, this is my student, Rachel, hello, whatever." And then he said, "And this is Edward Blakeman, and he has come specially to ask you some questions about Monsieur Taffanel." And it was extraordinary because Noyes just kind of gasped, and he said, "Ah, my teacher." And then Trevor looked at Noyes and said, "Ah, my teacher." And I looked at Trevor and said, "Ah, my teacher." It was one of those moments. I know there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Trevor's pupils, and therefore we're all grand pupils of Marcel Noyes and great-grand pupils of Paul Taffanel. It was one of those amazing moments. I've been so conscious of it ever since, of what's been passed on. Because in his teaching, Trevor often would say, Moyes always used to say this, you know. And I find all the time I'm teaching, I'm always saying, Trevor would say this, or Trevor always said that Moyes said this, or Trevor always said that Moyes said this, that Taffanel said this. Although I've ended up going down a rather different path from many other people, I do owe all of them so much, you know. He inspired Trevor. You know, I think something happened like the inspiration I got from Trevor. I could see Trevor got that from Moyes. In some ways, that's at least as important as any of the hard technical grounding. I mean, obviously you need that, and I craved it, and my goodness, Trevor was the one who gave me that. You know, there must have been many, many other people I could have had a very good experience with, but for me, I knew I needed somebody who was not going to just be polite. Was going to absolutely tell me when something wasn't right, you know, and then how to fix it,
Right.
and be inspirational at the same time. So, yeah, and I will always be incredibly grateful for everything that he did for me.